Getting It Right by Maeve Binchy. Irene had loved Jim for 17 months before he said that he loved her. "You do?" she said in delight. "It's not much of an answer," Jim grumbled. "You're meant to say you love me too." "Of course I do," she hugged him. "Well then," he said. "Well what?" She was confused. "Will we get married?" he asked, as if it was obvious. Her eyes filled with tears. He was so straightforward and honest. If you loved someone, that was it. You got married. No trials, no rehearsals, no seeing how things went. The whole worked. "I'd love to," she said simply. "I think we'll be very happy." And she was sure that they would. They laughed at the same things, they believed the same sort of beliefs, they liked the same kind of people. They weren't smart and glib and cynical. They thought that a lot of politicians were honest, a lot of churchmen were doing a good job. They didn't cheat on their income tax and boast about it. They didn't steal from the office or try to get away without paying a fare on the train. Irene's parents lived in Dublin, so Jim had met them often. On nights they had no money to go out, they often sat at home and looked at television with our parents. He supported a different team, and so had endless conversations about this with our father. Jim liked cooking and would debate with our mother ways of making bread. He said you could do great things with yeast. Irene's mother said life wasn't long enough to introduce yeast into cooking. In many ways, Jim was part of our family already, but the thing was that Irene had never met Jim's family. Not in the whole 2 years they had been going out. The subject had never come up. But now that they were going to get married, of course it would. Naturally, their son couldn't go home and say he was marrying this girl from Dublin and not introduce her. They'd surely think it strange that things had gone this far and they had not met her already. Irene began to be uneasy about it. Jim was very relaxed. "You'll come down and stay a weekend," he said. "When?" "Whenever suits you and them, I suppose. I'm easy." And he was easy, sure, confident, relaxed that it was all going to be fine. "Will we go next weekend?" Irene wanted to be over it. "No, I think they're away somewhere." He was vague. Imagine having parents who might be away somewhere. Irene's parents went abroad every 2 years. It was saved for, planned for, discussed. Everyone knew. She tried to think herself into a world where parents might be away. It was a leap too great to make. "Well, tell me when," she said, trying to hide her unease. "Sure." Jim went home about 4 times a year. He didn't phone much or write as far as she could see. But that was boys for you. He had a brother in America and a brother in England. Did they stay in touch with home? Jim wasn't sure. They probably did. They kept in great touch with him and came back for matches and to sleep on the floor of his flat in Dublin. They were nice fellas, much like Jim. They seemed pleased that he was getting married. "Do you think we'll be able to corral the parents in for the wedding?" said Kevin the eldest, home on a visit. A dart of fear came into Irene's heart. Did this mean that Jim's parents might not approve? They might think her too lowly for their son. She had written them a nice note saying that she was very happy to be marrying their son. There had been no reply. Don't worry about that," Jim reassured her. "They mightn't have been there. They're not letter writers." It seemed pretty thin to Irene. All they had to write was a card saying they were pleased too, or a ring. She had given her phone number. He was their first child to marry. They must disapprove of her greatly. And then, of course, Irene became very proud and even blustering. What reason had she to feel defensive? They hadn't even met her. How could they disapprove at long distance? When she did get to see them, she would knock their eyes out. They would realise that their Jim was very lucky to have been accepted by Irene. That's the way she was going to look at it. But nearer the time, when the date was fixed, her courage lessened. She had tried without any success to get a picture of their lifestyle. Jim had very few photographs of himself as a child. They're all at home in an album. You'll see them when you come to stay. But she wanted to see them before. She wanted to forewarn herself, to have some inkling about the home she was going into. In terms of describing his own lifestyle, he was worse than useless. "I'm doing my best, love," he would say. But how do I answer a question like that? There's no answer to it. The question had been, "What is your sitting room like at home?" It was a question that Irene would have thought a slow learner and mixed infants could have answered. She had looked so cast down that he made a huge effort. "It's got chairs and things," he said eventually. Jim had been at boarding school, which made him a higher class than Irene, or so she said. Jim didn't understand this. "I keep telling you, it was only because they were always so busy at home that they sent us to that place," he said over and over, "and my grandfather paid." But it was a very posh thing to be busy. Irene thought of her parents. The only thing that made them busy was her father going out to work on shifts to pay for the house and the food for them all, and her mother cleaning the house and queuing in cheaper places to buy the food. "Did your parents have lots of friends when you were young?" she asked Jim. Apparently they had lots. Different people from here and there. Irene's parents had only 4 friends. They went out together, all 6 of them on a Saturday night. They lived in the same road. She couldn't imagine anyone having different friends from here and there and being too busy to cook for your children, so you had to send them to boarding school. These must be seriously frightening people. Yet Jim talked of them with vague affection and warmth, and when pinned down, said they were very good and very kind, and he was sure Irene would love them, and that they would love her. Irene wasn't all sure. She was going to give it her best shot. She borrowed a suitcase, a small leather one from Kitty at work, and a jacket from Jenny, and a simple gold chain that Jim's parents wouldn't know was real gold. She borrowed her mother's watch because it didn't have a funny face on it like her own did. She read a book on wine appreciation and one on recognising antiques. By the day of the visit, she was as ready for them as she ever would be. She had thought that they would travel together, she and Jim on the train to the country, and that his parents would drive to meet them. She had asked what kind of car, but it had been different cars, this kind and that kind. There was always a bus, Jim had said, if they weren't there. But why wouldn't they be there? Oh, you know, so many things to do, here and there. But as it happened, on the very day they were to leave, Jim got a job that meant he wouldn't be able to come on the train with her. It was such a good chance he would be foolish to pass it up. It might make a difference to his whole future in the farm. "I'll wait with you and come on the later train," Irene said, but Jim didn't think that was a good idea. "They think we're coming on the 7 o'clock train," he said. "They might be there, better not to upset them." He gave her instructions about the bus if they didn't turn up. Since it was almost certain that they wouldn't be there, Irene couldn't see why she had to go alone. But she didn't want to fuss Jim further, so she went. Of course, they weren't at the station, but she found the bus and the house. It was quite small and shabby looking. She noted with relief a tangled garden, a creeper practically growing in through the windows. But this could be old money. She knocked nervously and nobody answered, so she went around to the back door, where she thought she had seen some signs of life. And there she found them. Tall, middle-aged couple. The look on their faces was one of alarm rather than welcome. "I'm delighted to meet you," she said, stretching out her hand. "I'm Irene." "Yes, the man said, taking her hand. The woman wore rubber gloves and had been cleaning the floor. "Well, indeed, I'm sure," she said. "It wasn't a great reception, but at least they hadn't thrown her out. Said she was too common for their son. That said, she would have to fight them every inch of the way." Irene wondered had she seen too many old movies, read too many novels, but they hadn't asked her to sit down or offered to show her her room or give her a glass of sherry. "So here we are," Irene beamed at them. Her mother had what was called an infectious laugh. People would start to laugh when she did. Irene thought it might not be wise to laugh in this kitchen. Not yet. But perhaps she might have inherited an infectious smile. It turned out not to be the case. "Why don't we leave all this and go in and have a little drink?" she said. Somebody had to do the hostess bit, otherwise the show wouldn't go on. They looked at her startled. "That's what Jim would like, I think," she said firmly, trying to keep down the nervous beating of her heart. Nothing he had told her could have warned her of two such extraordinary people. It wasn't even as if they were hostile. For them, she didn't exist. The unlikely threesome moved into the front room. There were pictures and a piano, family groups. It was hard to pinpoint Jim. There were girls also, possibly cousins. Irene didn't want to ask that they should all be identified yet. Jim's mother had at last removed her rubber gloves, which was in advance, and his father was moving towards a drinks trolley. Mead, he suggested. Irene knew when something looked like the only game in town. Mead would be lovely, she said. She told him about her train journey down. It was tough going. Where did you come from? Jim's father asked eventually. Dublin, Irene said. Oh. They both nodded sagely and looked at each other as if this might explain something. But surely you knew? They shook their heads. We are told very little, Jim's mother said. Less and less, his father added. Irene felt defensive about Jim. They were implying that he was keeping them in the dark. But you're so busy, she said, so tied up in things. That's why you don't hear every little detail. I wouldn't say we were that busy, her future father-in-law said. He had a long, narrow face, so unlike the chubby, smiling features of his son did Irene fought to see the likeness. Not since you were tired, certainly, said his wife. Her face, too, was thin and angular, yet all the sons had been quite plump. Irene wondered, would her children be a throwback to this particular cast of face? How extraordinary it all was. I meant socially, with your social life, she said. I can't think when we've been invited anywhere, he said. Or invited anyone in, added the woman. Irene wondered whether she was imagining it, or was the woman looking at her rather pointedly. I don't want to interrupt anything you may have planned. I hope you'll just carry on as normal, Irene said. Yes, well that's what we were thinking, the man said. And what had you in mind to do? Irene wondered how many more hours she could keep this up until Jim arrived. He had said it might be nice for her to get to know his parents on her own, to share their interests. Well, we never do anything much, his mother said. We prefer to let the world pass us by, said his father. That'll be nice. I'm sure we'll all like that, Irene said, biting her lip in desperation. Is that what you're going to do too? The man asked politely. Well, of course, if that's what you do, we'd love to do that. Fit in. There are more of you, the woman looked around in alarm. Well, no, only us, Jim and me. Her grammar had gone haywire. Jim's parents were deranged. Why hadn't he told her? Jim, they both said in confusion. Your son, Irene said, holding tight to the arms of the chair. Our son isn't called Jim, the man said, his eyes narrowing darkly. Well, James, then, I suppose. She should have known that there were people who wouldn't use diminutive forms of address. Ah, James, they relaxed a bit. How do you know James? The woman asked. I'm going to marry James, Irene said. And at the look of shock and horror in their faces she finally broke. She stood up from her chair. I don't know what kind of game you're playing. You know we're getting married. He told you, I told you, his brothers told you. If you think you're making me feel foolish by all this carry-on, you're quite wrong. I don't care if you think I'm nothing. I am a real person, and a good person, and I'm gonna make Jim very, very happy. So there. Jim's mother appeared to have fainted. His father was reviving her, unwisely possibly, with more mead. Irene sat sobbing, waiting for them to say something. Eventually Jim's father asked, How long has this relationship been going on? For 2 years. I wrote it all to you. And has James asked to be freed from his vows? Laicized. What vows? James, as you very well know, has been a priest on the missions in Africa for the past 20 years, said the man. And soon the mead was being used to revive Irene. It got sorted out. There were 2 houses near the bus stop. One of them belonged to Jim's family, and one belonged to this couple. Irene had chosen the wrong one. This couple had 5 daughters, nuns in convents, and 1 son, a missionary priest. All of them had sent letters recently saying that it was time the parents had help in the home. They had been trying to tidy up their home so that the help, when it was eventually summoned, would not find the place too terrible. They thought Irene was the lady from the agency. By the time Jim's train arrived, they had finished the mead and they knew all about each other. It had been great having so many vocations in the family, but sad because the way things were, it had meant no grandchildren. In a way, the man said, he had been half excited when Irene said she was going to marry Father James. It might have meant a baby on the way. Maybe some of the girls will come out. Loads of them do. Irene was quite recovered now, and feeling all the better because she had heard about her real parents-in-law. Terrifying, ageing hippies apparently went round the place in a trailer. Their house was in even worse state than this one. They had been to Graceland in America and Nashville, and they wore beads and long hair and grew strange things in the garden that weren't weeds but weren't dug up either. The sons had all turned out great fellas and were very tolerant to the half-daft parents. Maybe I'd better go over there, Irene said. Yes, but make yourself look a bit less like the perfect weekend guest, they suggested. They gave her a flower for her ear and told her to exchange her posh patent leather shoes for sandals. When Jim arrived, Irene was sitting on the floor with his parents, looking through pictures of their last trip to Stonehenge. Don't you think she's wonderful? He asked, putting his arm protectively around Irene in case their praise wasn't high enough. And more than that, she's made friends with the boring old Barrys across the road, said his father. The people who looked down their noses on us for years. The ones that were too religious for their own good. They've asked us all in for mead tomorrow at lunchtime. Jim looked at Irene with adoration. I told you it'd be no trouble, he said. And you were right, said Irene, who had an unerring sense of knowing when there was more to be said and when there was nothing more to be said.